Good afternoon, everybody. It's my pleasure to welcome you all to this program. And I also thank Purnima and Akhil for taking this initiative to organize this program to commemorate the International Women's Day. The topic that we have decided is women in leadership. Uh, And of course, you talk about women in leadership in CSD. The first name that comes to your mind is none other than Durgabai Deshmukh. So she was a leader in her own right, and among many other things that she did as a leader was to establish CSD. But when we celebrate with this topic, let's not celebrate only leadership in the sense that only celebrate achievements of few women who have done wonders in political arena, in corporate sector or in some other area, but also all the leaders who are working in their own domain, maybe in a small place, in a small community, maybe they take leadership to solve some local problem which otherwise remained unsolved for years uh, because the women empowerment is not just about leadership, it's also about having them their rights. And people talk about glass ceiling, that okay, you can go up to some place but not beyond that. But I think to me, glass fence is more important than glass ceiling, because the major problem in India is not that you are not able to rise in an organization, but essentially you are not able to get out of your home. That is the glass fence we have. When your workforce participation rate is less than 20%, that says something. And that has been declining over time. Now, that's a major, negative, trend that we have seen over the last few decades, not few years. Now, why this is happening, that is something to be understood. It's not easy. It's not like it's just about leadership, but there are some social constraint, institutional constraint that might be the factor behind it. And we must not forget that, this when you talk about women's deprivation, there are layers within it. It's not like about, not allowing somebody to rise above, but it's also about, you know, giving them rights. Now, there are a lot of layers, as I said. Today, if some big company, which is not giving equal right to its women employees, you don't give equal pay as you pay the men, and suddenly the ownership of that company falls in the hands of a woman. You think that things will change, from the next day, the women employees will get their rights? No, because you are working in the same patriarchal institutional social system. That is something needs to be challenged. So I think that, along with leadership and leadership at all levels, we need to understand what are the problems that women facing, in all spheres, not only in the sphere of work, but in society, in family, in all other possible areas. Now, to do this, we have, very eminent personalities. The session would be chaired by Dr. Gabin Kelkar, who is currently a visiting professor at CSD, but she has held many important positions. I'm not going to details of that. We have Dr. Venkat Narayanan, who is teaching at Christ University. You see, you have a man to celebrate Women's Day, not to give a sense that the women panelists come as a matter of reservation. No, they come in their own right, and a man can also come in his own right. So we have mixed panel in that sense. We have Dr. N. Maithili from NUPA, and last but not the least, we have Dr. Nitya Rao from University of East Anglia. I will not take much of your time, and I will now request Dr. Kelkar to take charge and conduct the session. Thank you all.
Thank you, Professor Nityanand. You really set the tone in terms of our discussions today. That what we are discussing is leadership in the context of challenging the patriarchal social, political, economic system that is likely to work or not likely to work, and what should be the conditions that would make it work. I would like to first greet all of the distinguished speakers and all of us who have gathered, the so-called audience, who are contributing to this knowledge sharing assembly and on the International Women's Day. I think CSD has conducted these sessions earlier also, which I am very pleased to kind of thing. Even when I was not there, then also I had shared a session. So that is it is actually an ongoing effort, but certainly an effort to be noticed in this regard. And thank you, Purnima, Dr. Purnima, to taking all the kind of tasks for organizing it. So in a recent discussion on COVID-19, one point that media repeatedly pointed out that under women's leadership of political processes and organizational structures, there were effective policies in relative terms to address the control of virus. When the women were leaders, state leaders, how the virus was controlled. So certainly a kind of attention was drawn that there are some kind of special ways of dealing with it. In India, the Kerala Shailaja teacher was pointed out repeatedly. So what kind of aspect of the leadership were there, whether the more engaging work was done or something was there that pointed out. Our distinguished panelists, who are eminent in their respective fields of knowledge, would like to address these questions in my mind in their allocated time. How much allocated time we have for each speaker, Purnima? 15 minutes?
Yeah, ma'am. 15 to 20 minutes for each speaker.
Okay.
After which we'll have the discussion.
All right.
Yeah.
So how have women, one question that comes to my mind is really with the request to speakers in their kind of when they are speaking, how have women and men been enabled through policies and strategies to deal with the basic needs and capability development? Capabilities, both basic capabilities and also the kind of advanced capabilities in the development process when the government says and the other policies also besides the government, social, civil society networks policies also, that how they have paid attention to the basic and advanced capabilities with regard to the women where they are working. Second question was that coming to my mind, what impact these policies have had on economic agency and rights of women, influencing day-to-day aspect of their lives. So that would be another important thing that once the policies were made, whether they had any impact. And policy I'm using in a kind of very broad sense of the term as it was, because both the government and non-government institutions, organizations, citizens, they are really participants of the policy making. When these pressures are generated, then policies are made. And third question, I also wanted, I am requesting to the distinguished speakers to address today. Has there been change in inequalities in this country or region, South Asia region, both social and gender inequalities, and in closing the gap in gendered system related to power and resources? So these are the kind of terms in which we are looking at the impact in terms of when the women are leadership at various levels, then what kind of things they have taken into account. So thank you very much. With this request, I am kind of requesting the speakers to come to take over the charge. Professor Nityanand has kind of briefly addressed the speakers, But our first speaker is Dr. I will go by the order of the flyer says, Dr. Venkat Narayanan. He has done his master's and he's a political scientist and is from PhD from the Center for Study of Law and Governance at Jawaharlal Nehru University, New Delhi. And he has traveled widely, including Eritrea and Pavia in Italy. And he has published research articles and authored books and chapters in national and international journals and publishers. And of course, he contributes to magazines like The Wire, The Hindu, Frontline, progressive kind of magazines known to us. So he is the first speaker. Second would be Professor Mathili. And she is assistant professor at the NIPA and in Delhi, and she has been leading the research discourse in a school on leadership or school of school leadership, and particularly related to gender and social leadership in the Indian context. She has also published Women in School Leadership by Sage and other kind of publishers. She completed her PhD from the Institute of Social and Economic Change, Bangalore. And before joining NIPA, she has worked with the TISS, Tata Institute of Social Sciences, Azim Premji Foundation, and Center for Multidisciplinary Development Research at Karnataka. So she has this kind of various, a very broad range of coverage in terms of both her work and also the looking at the social systems. Then our eminent speaker is Professor Nitya Rao, who is a professor of gender and development at the University of East Anglia in UK. And Professor Nitya Rao is a researcher and advocate in the field of women's rights, employment, education for over 3 decades. She has vast experience of gender change in land, agrarian relations, migration, livelihood, especially in the context of the climate variability and economic precarity. She has consistently engaged with policy and practice at both the global and local levels, and she is a member of these committees of the United Nations Committee on the Girls' Education Initiative for over a decade, and she currently is a member of the steering group of high-level panel of experts to Global Commission on Food Security. So this tremendous, and having had a kind of 25 years, having had and have 25 PhD students who have completed under their research under supervision. So that is the distinguished speakers of today has very vast kind of experience and commitment to the question of looking at the commitment to the field of knowledge, particularly in the field of gender and development. So I would now really invite the speakers without interrupting them, now one after another, and then towards the end we can have questions. I don't think you would need the change of, you would need about stopping you, but please, if you can sum up in about 12 to 15 minutes your session, that would be good, so that one doesn't have to do the unpleasant task of that time is up. But if you need, we can remind you. Purnima, you can do that. Thank you. I think 2 minutes before that they complete, so something is not left. So with this background, can we invite Dr. Venkat Narayan first?
Thank you, Professor Kelkar.
Sorry, Narayanan.
Narayan. Thank you, Professor Kelkar. I thank CSG for this wonderful opportunity to be here to share some of my thoughts here. Rather than a celebration, I don't see Women's Day as a celebration. Probably it could be a time to critically self-introspect us in looking at the situation in which the country is, probably in related to the gender equality is concerned. That is what I'm just going to do. Rather than getting into any specific kind of area as such, I'm just going to lay down a larger theoretical framework, hopefully within the stipulated time, larger theoretical framework and its relevance in the contemporary time. I'm also trying to provide some of the data also, recent data, which shows that these patriarchal notions are something which are still continuing as far as the Indian society is concerned. To a larger extent, it is not only India, all over the world, but to be very specific, I'm just going to quote some of the data from the Indian situation also. As far as the gender hierarchy is concerned, if you're going to look at that, many times we understand gender hierarchy by raising some of the questions, a Socratic way of understanding only. But why do women dress like this? Why do women wear ornaments? Why do women have this Mangal Sutra Tali? Why there is a very locality where women have to move to the husbands? Like this, various questions whenever we try to really bring up in our mind, many times most of us don't really engage in such kind of a critical self introspection. Many times when we run behind this question, we will try to understand the whole patriarchal structure, which plays a very significant role as far as the society is concerned. To be very specific, the patriarchy is not something which is very confined to the private sphere. As we know that whenever it exists in the private sphere, automatically there is a possibility of it having an impact as far as the public sphere also. That is what we see in the contemporary times, as Director Professor Nanda also pointed out regarding the labor participation rate. If you're going to look at the past 2 decades, it is coming down. It's something which is very shocking as far as the women's participation level is concerned. I don't know whether we are moving towards trying to uphold the conservative value of women shouldn't participate as far as labor is concerned, or somewhere we need to really introspect those aspects also. These notions are not something which are very specific to the third world countries as such. We need to understand that. I can just give you an example of Oxford University, which is considered as a very highest seat of learning, which was started in the year 1096, but they started awarding degree to women only in 1920. Almost 824 years later only. Still the time, the notion which prevailed over there is that women does not have the ability to get education or think critically. That is what the whole notion that prevailed in the Western societies also. Even the Cambridge also gave degree to the women, started awarding degree to women almost 739 years later only. Till the time the patriarchal notions were quite prevalent over there at all. If I'm going to quote eminent gender historian Gerda Lerner, she is one of a very feminine, very prominent academician whose book, The Creation of Patriarchy, is still one of our classical texts whenever we want to understand this patriarchy is concerned. How patriarchy manifests and institutionalize the domination of men over women and children within the family and extends its influence over the public sphere in the society. So whatever notions we carry at the private sphere, these are the things which are going to be exhibited to a larger extent at the private sphere. In spite of all our education, in spite of all our progressiveness, many times we do exhibit those things which we practice. That has been, we have been socialized from the beginning as far as the household level is concerned. That is the reason why whenever we want to really bring about any kind of a progressive changes, we need to really critically introspect the whole value system that exists as far as our society is concerned. That is going to play a very significant role. As far as the Indian context is concerned, we cannot understand patriarchy without understanding the relation between the patriarchy and the caste system in India is concerned. To be very specific, if I want to quote Dr. Ambedkar's work on the caste in India, the mechanism, it is considered still as one of a very, very significant work to understand about the nature of the caste system as far as and patriarchy, the Brahminical patriarchy as far as the India is concerned. In 1916, he presented this paper in an anthropological seminar in Columbia University. If you're going to, I'm just going to quote some of the data to show that how relevant that paper is even in the contemporary times. The nature of the society, the whole social structure, what he tried to explain in his paper, it's still a very, very relevant one for us to understand that one. What he is trying to talk about as far as the patriarchy is concerned, he says that the whole caste system, as far as India is concerned, the whole the functional component of the caste system is the patriarchy. That is controlling the sexuality of the women. That plays a very, very significant role as far as the whole caste system to sustain for quite a long period. How do they control the sexuality of women? It is only through the endogamous marriage. That has been one of a very prominent one as far as the Indian society is concerned. I'm just going to give some data later also regarding this endogamous marriage is concerned. And there also he tries to do a critical understanding how if a particular community is going to have an imbalance between the men and women, then they try to adopt certain kind of a mechanism to address that one. For example, if there are going to be more women and less men over there, that is where they try to practice the sati, they try to practice the widowhood. All these practices have been introduced to not break the whole endogamy, but also to maintain the balance between the men and women is concerned. In a similar way, how the men, if a man, there is going to be more men and also a lesser women over there, that is where they also try to prescribe how this sainthood has been given to the men, as where they'll go in a religious journey, they'll go. If not, there is a possibility of child marriages, which is also one of a prescribed one as far as, so that the whole endogamous marriage system doesn't break away from this one. All the caste system continues. It is so relevant for us because still now we find that the marriages to a larger extent in India is concerned, more than 90% of the marriages happens within the particular caste only. So that reflects the nature of the endogamy, which is continuing even in the contemporary time as far as the Indian system is concerned. And further, he also talked about the hypergamy and hypogamy. The hypergamy is the one where the upper caste is allowed to marry the lower caste. That is to some extent allowed. Hypergamy is about the low caste men marrying the upper caste. That is absolutely not accepted at all as far as the Indian system is concerned. That is where you will find all these honor killings. When you're going to look at the record, most of the honor killings happen whenever the women is going to be from the upper caste and the men is going to be from the lower caste, because ultimately you're going to trace your lineage in a patrilineal manner only. Through the men only you're going to trace the lineage. You're going to carry the initial, or the family base is going to be only from the men. So that shows the nature in which the whole system has this patriarchal notions as far as the Indian society is concerned. When you're going to look at all kinds of cultural practices, even in contemporary times, many of the cultural practices, the kind of resistance being offered in many of the what we see in the Sabarimala case, also what kind of a resistance has been shown over there, that shows these notions are still entrenched as far as the Indian thinking is concerned. Why we need to understand this patriarchal notions as far as the India is concerned, that is very important for us to understand how the agency of the women is being restricted from the time of the birth. It is not only something which is going to operate when you're going for a work or something. It is something which is going to restrict the agency of the women at every point of time. As we know that the kind of feticide and other things, which shows that even before the birth itself, the women have been eliminated as far as in many situations are concerned. So that shows that the women to attain to leadership is the second question. The first thing is that the women has to first participate freely. That is the first thing over there. There itself, these notions are creating a larger structural obstruction as far as the women empowerment is concerned. So whatever kind of a data we want to look at as far as the Indian situation is concerned, unless and until we don't try to locate it within this larger structural patriarchal notions are concerned, then it will be it will not be easy for her to really understand the real meaning of the data also. So I'm just going to, as I told you in the beginning, these are the larger theoretical conceptual framework. I'm just trying to limit it as of now because I know that I have very limited time only. So probably I could, during the discussion also, we could elaborate something on that one. Now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take up some of the data to show that these notions which has been emphasized by the Ambedkar and others a long period ago, which still has a very strong relevance as far as the Indian society is concerned. As I told you, the intercaste marriages are concerned. The National Family Head Survey 2005-6 is one insignificant one which tries to show that there are only around 10% of marriages as far as the India is concerned. They are intercaste marriages over there. And within this intercaste marriages, also the pratiloma marriages, that is the upper caste woman marrying a lower caste man, is very, very limited. Around 4% only you will find that happening over there. And also the IHDS, that is the Indian Human Development Survey, which happened in the year 2011-12. That also tries to give information that it's only around 5.4% as far as the intercaste marriages in India is concerned. This shows that the women's agency in trying to choose a partner. This is one step. This is not a something which is going to give a comprehensive, but it shows that how women's sexuality is something which is to a larger extent constrained by the whole societal structure. It doesn't allow it to break away and move in a free manner at all. And whenever they try to do that, we have this concept of honor killing. I don't know whether it's a honor. As you know, that after a lot of struggle by the women's movement, finally in 2014 only, you will see that National Crime Records Bureau started recording this whole honor killing in India is concerned. Even though the numbers are not going to really show the real picture, because it shows around 400 honor killings between the year 1914 and 16. But many times we may not be able to really know whether a particular killing is something which is based on the honor killing or not at all. That all shows that whoever wants to break away, that too very specifically, women cannot break away from their whole the patriarchal notions. It's not very easy for her at all. And second significant aspect is regarding the child marriages. As I told you, Ambedkar identified during that period itself how the child marriages are something which are one of a mechanism through which how the endogamous community maintains the balance between the male and female is concerned. It's really startling to see that the census of India 2011, which shows that around 12 million children in India are married before the age of 10 years. Around 12 million children, out of which 84% of Hindus and 11% are Muslims also. They give such a kind of a specific data also. Even though we have a law which prohibits the Prohibition of Child Marriage Act in 2006 is there, it is not an act which is going to make a child marriage as a void ab initio. That means that it will only make it as a voidable. After the marriage, if men, or that is a girl or a boy, complains to the police or makes a complaint, then only they can make it as a void. If nobody is going to complain, that is the two parties who are going to get married, they are not going to complain, it is not considered as illegal at all. If imagine if they're going to make it, except in few places, for example, Karnataka is one classical example. They made it as through a state amendment, they made it as a void ab initio. So automatically, when the child marriage happens, automatically it becomes a void one. So in this way, another important report also I want to quote. Probably you could refer. Regarding this is very specifically related to the female foeticide and infanticide is concerned. In 2012, the Indian government came out with a report, the Children in India 2012, a statistical uprisal, which shows that around 3 million girls were missing in 2011 compared to 2001. We're talking about the women leadership, but 3 million children did not have the opportunity to even see the whole world. Then only they can think about other aspects as far as the leadership is concerned. That shows that the child sex ratio, this is very interesting data to quote. In fact, the child sex ratio of the age group 0 to 6 has reduced from 945 in 1991 to 914 in 2011. Almost you have more than 20-25% of the child ratio has reduced between the 2 decades. But the interesting point is that the overall sex ratio showed an improvement from 927 to 940. It's only the child sex ratio that is between the 0 and 6 that shows the decline. That gives a different kind of a picture how the women's life is being valued at the time of birth is concerned. And the next significant data is regarding the women reservation. As we know that it's been one of demand for quite a long period. In 1996, the bill was first placed in the parliament. Still now we are struggling to get any kind of development over there, even though it was once passed in Rajya Sabha in 2011, but it was not passed in Lok Sabha later. The women's, why it is more significant, even though we tried to post the 2019 Lok Sabha is something which has a maximum number of women, that is around 14% we have in the 2009 Lok Sabha, around 14% of the women are being represented over there. But if you're going to look at in 1950 itself, we have around 5%. So almost like 70 years later, we have just able to increase only 9%. Of the women's participation as far as the politics is concerned. It's really stunning to see how it is being, in spite of many political parties talking about the women's reservation. Yeah, we do agree that the intersectionality do play a significant role, but that is not the reason to stop the whole implementation as far as the women's reservation is concerned, as far as the politics. As Director Nanda has indicated in the beginning, the women's female labor force participation. It's really shocking when he quoted the data. I'm also trying to quote the same data. That is, by 1990, we had around 30.3% of participation as far as the female labor force participation is there. In
Dr.
2000, yeah.
Dr. Venkat, you have 2 more minutes.
Yeah, sure. So it has declined to almost 20.5% in 2019. It was a complete steep decline. In fact, the global gender gap index also, which shows that India was pushed towards 149 position in 2020. So these are some of the indicators which shows that there is a kind of larger patriarchal notions which constrains the women from participating. There has been debate going on regarding this Maternity Benefit Act also, which has extended the benefit to the women from 12 to 26 years. But the whole criticism is that by extending the number of days of holidays for women, you're trying to again reinforce that women are responsible to take care of the women, rather than giving the same kind of rights to men also. That means that the same amount of leave has to be provided to men also. Once you're going to provide to women only, you're trying to reinforce that women are responsible for children. And second aspect is that once you're going to give that, the employability of women is going to be reduced, because everybody knows that women has to undergo this, so their employability has to be reduced. They will not try to employ women also. So in this way, we need to have a larger structural understanding, so that at every aspect and every domain, if you're going to do that, the women's agency is being restrained from the time of their birth and till it continues till the time of death. That's what we can see that through this data, even though it's only a specific data quoted. If you want, we can have a larger set of data to understand the whole picture as far as the women is concerned, how the patriarchy tries to constrain the women is concerned. I'll just stop my talk with us, and if there is any question or discussion, I'll take it up later. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I was muted. Professor Venkat Narayanan. Now, can I come to Dr. Maithili or Professor Maithili?
Yeah.
Please take your...
Yes, madam. So, good evening to all. I would like to speak on women in school leadership from the book that I have published in 2019 recently. So I will go to my PowerPoint presentations and share the details. Okay. Yeah, next. See, the women in school leadership, the topic of the talk today, why women's leadership is important in school education. It has a positive impact on enrollment and participation of girls in the schools. Mothers talk easily about their children with women teachers and principals. Becoming a teacher is a powerful means to participate and establish identity within the communities in Afghanistan, Pakistan, and such other countries. That's how the UNESCO studies have shown some of these findings. And moreover, women leaders adopt democratic and participatory leadership styles, prefer relationship building and consensus for decision making, willing to work together and practice role modeling, future-oriented and less directive and autocratic, inclined to transformational leadership styles, promote pedagogy and assist in the growth of their staff in the schools. So these are some of the positive leadership aspects that women show, and the studies show across the globe with respect to the women, positive aspects of women leadership. The next one. Next slide. Yeah. What are the challenges of women's participation in the schools? See, some of the challenges, especially in the traditional societies, and which mostly has the developing countries, are covered compulsions to assume male persona to function as a school leader, and thwarted opportunities. See, in the thwarted opportunities, it can range from even getting on to the studies in education, leadership, to complete the degree. Those are also constraints for the girl students who pass out their 12th standard or so in some of the countries. Then the patriarchy, drawing a parallel between home and school. See, if a woman wants to become a teacher, the family sees what type of a school is it. Is it home like school? So that home like is one of the criteria for their daughters to join the school as teachers. Choosing a teaching profession due to respectability is weakening due to role conflicts in India and Sri Lanka. However, there is also a recognition that teaching profession is losing its respectability due to role conflicts in India and Sri Lanka. Okay, next. So, within these given constraints and within this, very short, brief introduction to the impediments and the challenges that women face to become leaders. Yeah, after becoming leaders, what really they how really they navigate through to become successful is something that was explored through a qualitative research study conducted in Indian context. So that the narrative analysis showed that the pattern that emerges is that there is a ladder of success, starting from to aspire and acquire the leadership position, aspire for leadership position, then acquire the leadership position, then achieve that leadership position, having working in the school for a while, then ascend as a leader, and then transcend as a leader. What do they actually mean? Aspire is about, to aspire for leadership is not only by the daughter or only by that women, but it is a collective aspiration of the significant others in the family, namely the parents and the husband mostly. Then it is about the intellectual capital in the family, the parental background, parental educational background, as well as the in-laws, house, when they are married into and go to the other family, become the members of the other family in the husband's house. Even that intellectual capital in terms of their educational qualification, then their job, their status also matters. Then the vocational anticipatory socialization is another factor, especially when the child is growing up, when the girl child is growing up, how they get influenced by the parents' aspirations and their preparations, so on and so forth. And also if their mothers are employed, that also has significantly influenced. Seeing them growing with the parents who are employed, growing with the parents who are aspirational though not employed, has really built in this occasional and anticipatory socialization. Then the next step in the ladder is to acquire. And this acquiring the leadership position comes from, working in the system for a while and then competing in the examinations or getting the leadership position as school heads through the promotions. Then what do they do? How do they do this? They negotiate with the responsibilities between family and the school, and they make their choices whether to become a leader or not, to acquire that leadership position or not. Then comply with the obligations and compulsions of the family and the job. This is very important, and they see it as a necessity to comply with the obligations and compulsions, and then look for the opportunities while complying with the obligations and compulsions. They look for opportunities, they search for opportunities, and then they try to get those opportunities for themselves. Then achieve. How do they achieve? After having gone into the leadership position, having taken it up, they have to really establish themselves as leaders. During those initial years of working as a school head, they actually do a lot of, they actually undergo a lot of negotiation and navigation processes. And what is captured here is, in a nutshell, they politicize the complexities, saying that all is well, and refuse to heed to the tension, saying that there is no problem at all, and construct a safety net of shadow neutrality around oneself, and yet problematize whenever negotiations are possible. A subtle tension therefore prevails beneath all these so-called, yes, all is well and there is no problem and I'm doing well. And this is a phase where there are the power relations operating, and Yasna trying to establish that status for herself as a school leader, and trying to work with all the teachers, the community, and the parents in particular. And the next step in the ladder, the ascent, actually is about, after having gained the position, worked for a while in the school system as a leader, occupying the position of the leadership as a school head. How do they evolve themselves is shown in this step 4 here. Having got the confidence of working well, having gained that knowledge of how a leadership role actually to be executed, and what I must do to work better and prove myself as a leader, the ascent, the 4th step in the ladder comes as ascent. That is the time when they try to assert and saying that they do not encourage the patriarchal practices in the school or back at home too, and do not succumb to the status quo. Assert merit over gender-based choices. Excel as a professional. Address covert and overt gendered practices within the school and even within homes. And raise the bar of excellence. They themselves raise the bar of excellence, revise their standards, revisit their standards, emphasize on self-effort to achieve the results. And this is the step 4. And having achieved this step 4 of increased confidence, and negotiations and navigations are much lesser to, take off that level of, emotionally, psychologically, intellectually stronger, they try to transcend. And here comes the attitude of service in the work that they do. And they consider the children's education as a cause of life, and cross over the norm-based leadership, practice transformational leadership, use school structure as an important means to strengthen agency, cross over the boundaries of the education system. So this is the ladder of success that the women go through. Next. Yeah, then if this is the ladder of success that they go through, that quest for success begins with the available opportunity in the leadership positions in the education system. They depend on recruitment policies and selection procedures in different states, distribution of school categories, schooling pattern, and school leadership positions which are interdependent, and parallel leadership positions such as alternate choices in the education system also are significantly influencing capabilities of aspiring women teachers to take up the leadership roles, also influence. Yeah, next. Yeah. So what is the status of the women in school leadership positions in India? A secondary data analysis of all states and union territories of India was analyzed. And this shows that there are particularly 4 school leadership positions. One is as the acting HM. Another is the head teachers. The third is the vice principals. 4 is the principals. Vice principals and principals cater to the senior secondary schools. Head teachers cater to the secondary schools. Acting HMs are mostly to elementary schools, but there is no HM appointed for the designated positions. So we find that as vice principals, women are higher represented in higher secondary schools, which has primary, upper primary, secondary, and higher secondary levels in it. And in this school category, even the women teachers are more. And these women teachers are more even in elementary schools, which is about 50.5%, and even in secondary schools, starting from primary schools, which is about 54.0. So by and large, we see that while the women teachers are larger in three of the 7 categories of schools, but women as leaders, when they ascend to those leadership positions, they are seen higher as vice principals in primary to senior secondary school levels. So this is the Indian scenario. However, there is a trend of increased participation of the women as teachers in this profession, but as leaders, there is still a need to ascend, and we need to see their participation more and more. Yeah, next. Yes. So then the qualitative data was further analyzed to find out what are those determinants of school leadership for women. Here, while doing so, the interaction between structure and agency was studied in depth through a fine-grained analysis of the narratives that were prepared by collecting the data, in which the agency was studied in the form of through the lens of projective and practical evaluative agency, and the structures were designed to be the family, the school, also considered a kind of a structure. So the interaction between the structure and agency was consciously studied. Why? Because we see that most of the studies either deal exclusively with the agency of the women, or exclusively with how structures influence. But when it comes to looking and then infer that there is a structure agency interaction, but now we were trying to see that how this interaction really happens. I was trying to see that in this book. And so they were looked for, in this fine-grained analysis, explicit and implicit cues observed or demonstrated by the women leaders, and loosely coupled options available as choices to be exercised. And these were the criteria that were taken to analyze. And what emerged was the 3 determinants, that is, determinants of school leadership of women are, they are people, they practice people-centered approach, and show restrained neutrality. It is not total neutrality when they are when they are working as leaders, but a restrained neutrality. And then building trust is another important determinant to become a successful school leader as a woman. So next. Yeah. So having
Dr. Maithili,
yeah,
you have 2 more minutes.
Yeah, having having identified the determinants, one step more was taken up. What is it? See, to become the women leader is one. To succeed as a women leader is one. But the legitimacy of to be established as a women leader is also another aspect. Here, the leadership behaviors were particularly studied in depth vis-a-vis their gender perspective. The gender perspectives were drawn from the theoretical underpinnings of Max Weber's, where the rational leadership style and traditional leadership. One more step, please, backwards. Yeah, were actually juxtaposed with promotion-focused leadership behavior and preventive-focused leadership behavior. Here we see that the aspects that were taken, the factors considered to study were the status, the perception of the power differentials, negotiations held, acceptance of the leadership, and therefore the legitimacy. The perception of the status, if it is higher, power differentials are lower, the negotiation is least, therefore the acceptance is very high, legitimacy is voluntary and therefore higher, that we normally see in the level of the transcend in the ladder that we saw, and the ascent. The status is higher, but the power differential is also moderate and it is mediated. This is seen in the level of achieve, the third step in the ladder. And if the status is lower, power differentials are also lower, negotiations are unfavorable, then it is the level of either not becoming a leader as yet, or just having entered as a school head through promotion or through direct recruitment. Then next please. It is in the same way the other also. Then how do we define the school leadership? Having studied these aspects and their negotiations and navigate through the negotiations and navigations, it is not all that easy that we know of, because these women have come from their middle class or lower middle class backgrounds, which is unlike the corporate leadership, or that we are talking of the very lowest strata of the society, where women, poverty, and the caste, other aspects have influenced a lot. These women are somewhere in the middle, and how do they navigate it was something that I try to capture. Therefore, defining a school leadership of women in Indian context was defined using a method of contradiction, that I would call it as a method of contradiction, having not only but also. And what is that not only but also? The school leadership of women is not only about doing leadership, but also about knowledge, which propels the very doing. It is not only about achieving the under favorable conditions, but also accomplishing in spite of. It is not only about the will to do, but the willingness to give up. It is not only the ownership, but the readiness to let go. It is not only about problematizing a situation, but looking afresh at situations with a hope in the future. It is not only about recognition, reward, or merit, but accepting the limitations, under recognition, misrecognition, non-recognition, or an extra recognition at times. Then it is not only about the vertical growth of creating followers as a leader, but an horizontal expansion working amidst people. It is not only about exercising the power, but understanding the power of the power. It is not only celebrating the success, but smiling at the failures. It is not only about getting the encouragement, but developing a dispassion about denial of opportunities. The last slide I would like to end with. So what is gender in school leadership in Indian context mean? It is about acting independently, yet exercising restrained neutrality. There is a peculiar admix of binaries in leading schools by women in India. That is, exercise caution over fearlessness, practicing masculinity and femininity together, silently resist covert compulsions arising from patriarchy, yet verbalize it occasionally, use intuition over logic, make no distinction between personal and professional life at times when it is called for. Then, thank you so much. This is my brief presentation.
Thank you, Dr. Maitri. It's wonderful. Okay. We are holding on to questions, and we will take after Professor Nithya Rao has presented. Professor Nithya Rao, can we request you to please take over?
Yeah, thank you very much, Govind. I would request Akhil either to share my presentation or to give me the screen, please, so that I can share.
I'll just transfer the hosting rights to you, ma'am. Just give me a second.
Yeah, please. So first of all, good afternoon to everybody, and thank you so much to CSD, particularly Govind and Dr. Nityananda for inviting me. And I think this is the occasion of International Women's Day. So greetings. And probably my presentation, I will try and make it a little more celebratory to see actually what rural women have done despite all the constraints. And on Govind's request also to look a little bit about policy and see where policy has helped, but what more can be done with policy.
Yeah, you are the host now. You can share.
But in the desktop, it is giving me option.
Share. If you press the share, I think that would be. No?
Can you see my screen? Or?
Yeah, it has come. It has come.
Okay. So I just need to go to slideshow. Yeah. So thank you again, and I will try and be quick. So really, my topic, I have been working for a long time on the issue of rural women, and also with Govind on issues of land and employment and labor of rural women. But today, specifically in the context of food and nutrition security, and I think the recent COVID-19 pandemic, particularly, I'll make some comments, has really brought this to light very much. So we know that the rural context, there's more than 30 million people who are migrating, but as per the last census, only 16% of women are independently migrating for work. So what is the converse? Converse is most of the women then are staying in the rural areas. India, as we know, has about 80% are very small and marginal farmers. They're not able to survive. So when the men are migrating for work, the women are actually staying behind, engaged in agriculture, either in family-owned enterprises, so family farms, as unpaid household workers or their own family workers, or as agricultural or allied wage workers. So I think this is something that we know. I think today, International Women's Day, I should actually make a remark that over the last 40, 50 years, since 1975, which was the first International Women's Year, the inequality between men and women was recognized globally. I think we have made a lot of progress in terms of gender equality, at least awareness about gender equality. Across the world, we find progressive policy change for women's rights. I think Venkat commented on a few of the policies, even in India itself, whether it is the political empowerment at the grassroots level, Panchayati Raj, which happened in 1992-3, even though we haven't had the women's participation in parliament bill as yet, which is indeed a shame. But there has been inheritance to property, including agricultural land. There has been the right to education. There has been the law against domestic violence. And the most recent and most relevant from the perspective of my talk is actually the National Food Security Act 2013, which was interesting because it recognized women as central to food security. So within the National Food Security Act, perhaps the only act in India which recognizes that for the purposes of this act, that woman would be considered as the head of the household. So she would be the recipient of the food security. However, a number of challenges, of course, do remain, and some of them I will allude to as we go along. One thing that I would like to say is that, just building on some of the research that I did about the structural changes and the agricultural transformations that are taking place, that we find with this context of, mostly women are managing farms, that there is an intensification of labor of women, which has impacts on food security and nutrition. So this was a small study that I had done in Koraput in Odisha and Wardha in Maharashtra, where we did time use and diet surveys with 60 households, both husbands and wives, across 3 seasons, because agriculture, of course, is very seasonal, planting, harvesting, and lean. And the results were quite stark. And of the overall work, when we did a time use survey, that women were doing confirmed by the National Time Use Survey, which was released in October last year. But within agriculture, they are not minor. They are doing 75 to 80% of agricultural work in the planting and harvesting season. But alongside this, 95% of all domestic and care work. The time deficits of care are more intensive for women from landless and marginal households in particular, because they have to go for wage labor. So while women in their own households, they can family farms, they can adjust and come home in between, but when they are going for wage labor, they can't do that. Almost 30% decline. So this helps us understand the recent results from the National Family Health Survey, which was just a few weeks ago, that actually child nutrition has gone down in India after 1998-99. In 2019-20, the child nutrition figures have worsened or have plateaued. And this can be explained by the fact that the women's care work or the women's work in food security, in transforming the food into cooking it, collecting the firewood, feeding it, is really squeezed. And women's own health, they encounter, this is actually globally, seasonal weight loss is much higher for men. But in India, we find a situation where seasonal weight loss is much greater for women compared to men, because they're doing intense activity during these seasons but have reduced consumption. So a big challenge I feel is the lack of recognition of rural women as farmers, and this has implications in terms of devaluation or invisibility of women's work. So I think Venkat quoted the figure of declining labor force participation, but I think some of us firmly believe that actually women are working even harder than before, but it is just that their work is invisible. It is not being counted in our national statistics. Secondly, as I said, I just spoke about agriculture and farming, that they're doing 80% of the work, but in terms of land titles, as Govind knows, has done a lot of research as well, only 13% as per agricultural census. Poor health and nutrition, I've just given you some figures, and also violence against women, I won't go into, but declining child sex ratios, Venkat has also referred to. And we find, for instance, in the Global Gender Gap Report, the most recent one, that India's position has gone down. Of course, rather than accepting the problem, we often end up challenging some of these global indicators, especially because Bangladesh has greatly improved to position 50, whereas India is at 112 out of 153. So I think this whole issue of gender inequality and challenges really remains. Just quickly, a very conceptual thing in terms of women. As I said, women are still working hard, despite the seasonal weight losses, despite overburdening themselves, labor intensification, because of the centrality of women for food security and nutrition at household levels. And this is a diagram that I picked out from the World Food Programme. But I just want to say that the blue boxes is about the livelihood assets, and the blue rectangular box is based about household food production, wage earnings, cash, etc., which both men and women contribute. But when we move towards food and nutrition security, if you look at the yellow boxes, the central one is about care and health practices. So alongside the household food access, to actually be food secure, this care and health practice is very important. And this is centrally on women's heads, if you like, and women recognize it. And that is one reason they intensify their own labor in order to meet this. The third yellow box, of course, refers to the structures, which is the health and hygiene conditions, the water, the sanitation, the care services, and so on. And it is a bit disappointing that in the recent budget, there has actually been some pullback on some of this funding or budgets for the women and child, for Anganwadis, for health workers, for the Ujjwala program, and so on. So I think this is the third, which is actually going to negatively affect women. Just one brief about the impacts of COVID-19. That as I've just said, women have the primary responsibility for the procurement of food, and we have seen this, that it has led to enhanced stress. There's lack of money to purchase commodities because the men lost their jobs, they had to come home, increasing work burdens. Many women in Rajasthan, when the men were coming back from Surat and so on, after some very bad experiences there, beating by the police and so on, they let them rest at home, and the women did extra work. Apart from looking after these men, they also did extra work, going to Nariga jobs, and so on. The increased care burdens because school closures, Anganwadi closures. So apart from, care tasks with extra jobs, lot of women where I work in Bihar and Jharkhand and Odisha, that lot of women actually, the indebtedness really increased. And I think globally we are saying that COVID-19 has been a setback for all the rights, many of the rights gained, including in the US and so on. But I find that in terms of assets, that women indebtedness to bring their men back home from wherever they were stuck to provide for the family has led to a loss of women's assets further. And of course, this also rising instances of violence and so on, which we know is a reality. But having said that some of these challenges, I want to be on a more positive note about experiences, some examples of grassroots women's leadership, that despite all the obstacles, I think women don't lose hope. They're very resilient and they fight back. And how are they actually fighting back, and what can we do to support them? So I will not go into the NGO Anandi, but they have an interesting model of women's leadership. It is a non-governmental organization linked to empowerment, which is very much based on mobilization and collective action on issues of food, health, work, getting positions into local governance like Gram Panchayats, empowering women in Gram Panchayats, enabling them to negotiate with the government and so on, and also building some level of collective assets. But this is still at the level of claiming rights, which is very, very important. I actually want to, and like claiming material rights, claiming credit, claiming land, claiming food, and so on. Rights is very important. But I think one thing that gets neglected, which I would like to speak about, is also women's knowledge. I think somebody mentioned this, but actually, they're not only laboring bodies. We often treat women as just labor, that they will work and work and work. But we don't give any credibility or any importance to women's intelligence, their thinking, their critical faculties. I think Govind spoke about capabilities. And I think there is a lot about traditional knowledge, women's knowledge, particularly in farming, which is not recognized, I think, even by the NFSA or any of the other acts. So just two examples I want to give you. One is of the community-based natural farming in Andhra Pradesh, which I had an opportunity to visit, and this they are doing it as a state-level program. But this really built on Andhra Pradesh's numerous women self-help groups and federations which have been developed over the last 20, 30 years. And what was interesting to me is that it actually is a model which is based on not only collective action but also peer learning, where they give these women in the SHGs, they actually acknowledge that these women have some knowledge about seeds, what kind of planting, what is the balance between planting for consumption versus planting for sale. So they have a mixed cropping rather than monocropping, multi-level plants, seed varieties, combination of seed varieties, some for high yielding, some for fodder, some for consumption, some for medicinal properties. And the interesting thing also of the model is they have recruited, because it's a state-run system, agricultural graduates and put them into these communities, so that they also bring agricultural sort of so-called modern scientific knowledge. And it's really a process of peer learning and peer exchange between these women and women's groups and the agricultural graduates and the others. And they also look at the whole chain of the food system, from production to nutrition. So I think this is very interesting and important model to kind of think about. And I will just talk in a few minutes about something that we ourselves are doing in Jharkhand with the Santals, actually in the Santal Parganas, which is where I have worked since the mid-90s. So this is an area very close to my heart for the last 25 years. As part of a research and translation award, we have set up something called Chirag, which is the creative hub for innovation, reciprocal research and action for gender equality in sustainable food systems. So we draw a lot of the Santals and tribal communities in India. The literacy rate is very low, but this doesn't mean that women don't have knowledge. So our first dimension is creative practice, that we allow through performance, through local food festivals, through orality, for people to express and share knowledge. Capture this on a digital platform based on a voice response system. Curriculum development and of course advocacy for institutional acceptance is very important. So just some examples. This was exactly a year ago. I was there at the end of February before the lockdown, and this was in a local market or heart. The women's groups, they were doing small theatre in order to talk about some of the gender issues within food and nutrition security. Then the younger youth, women as well as boys, young women and men, I think they tried to document some of the traditional knowledge around local foods. They talked to their grandmothers, their mothers, their fathers, and they tried to put together some of the nutritional values of some of these food items. Another intervention which was part of our project was actually cameras, participatory filmmaking. That this is a group of women there, and one of my colleagues from film studies, actually, she was very fortunate. Just before lockdown, the first half of March, till March 8th, she was actually in this village in the Santal Parganas, training and working with this group of women and some young men in terms of participatory filmmaking. She gave them this very high resolution professional camera, and it has been very fortunate for us that over the last year, during lockdown, they have continued to make, we could not reach there, but they have continued to make films across season, documenting local foods. They set up a YouTube channel where they have been posting this. They have been doing peer learning, showing it to other community members, having discussions and so on. So this has been a great opportunity. There's a small video clip, but I will just skip that and move to the last part. Oh, sorry, just 30 seconds. About the workshop. just wanted to, so these people are really taken hold of this technology and they are using it. So I think just to conclude, I would like to come back to the conceptual issues around agency and leadership. So one is going back to the definition of food security, which has been recognized by the Food and Agriculture Organization. I think Govind mentioned in my introduction that I'm now part of the high-level panel of experts to the Global Commission on Food Security. And in our last report called the Global Narrative Report, which was released last year, we had suggested that the traditional definition of food security includes 4 dimensions: access, availability, utilization, and stability. But if you actually look at the long form, we have suggested that implicitly there were 2 other dimensions, but they need to be made visible as well. We are talking about the visibility of women's work. We're talking about visibility of agency and leadership. So agency and sustainability. That all this that I have said in terms of food and nutrition security, it really involves struggles, everyday agency in order to provide safe, sufficient, nutritious food to all people. And we need to acknowledge this agency and support it. So what we have said in terms of policy shifts, which is what Govind was asking to comment on, that we need to look at food security and nutrition as a system, not just as a sectoral agriculture or food issue, but as an interconnected with other systems and sectors, including health, including education, including trade, the structural factors, including economic policy. These are very important. In the COVID-19 pandemic, we have seen that trade and supply chains broke down and led to decline in consumption. People were stuck, they could not transfer money. Health systems collapsed. So schools stopped functioning. So this is an interconnected system of food security. Secondly, I think very important that rather than focusing on individuals, when we look at hunger and malnutrition in all its forms, we have to look at the complex relationship to one another. And I have demonstrated early on that, mothers' lack of time or women's work actually contributes to child undernutrition. So unless and until we see the two as interconnected, we will not separately, whatever we may do, we will not be able to address issues of child undernutrition unless we also address work. And I think it goes back to the point that is it really declining female participation, or are women working more, but we are not acknowledging it? And this is visible in our NFHS data of increased child stunting and undernutrition. Third, we have to work towards a radical transformation of the food system as a whole, which means, talking to local people, recognizing local knowledge, seeing what is possible locally, empowering local communities in order to actually exercise agency. They know what they do. We create more obstacles for them by saying that, okay, these forests will be taken over for some eucalyptus plantations in Koraput or something else. We destroy their food system rather than listening to them. And finally, that this has to be context specific. We have to be willing to take diverse solutions according to people's local needs. And my last slide is really that if we are really looking for gender justice in today's International Women's Day, then the policy framework to look at gender justice alongside food and nutrition security, I think first, many of us have been struggling, and Govind has been part of that movement of recognizing women as farmers and workers with equal entitlements, not just land or credit, but also in terms of their knowledge. I think high time we recognized women's knowledge. Secondly, public resources do need to be distributed equitably. The feminist movement has been asking for this, whether it is the distribution of nutrition-rich eggs in Anganwadi centers or schools or other social protection measures, maternity benefits, keep on diluting it. As I said, NFSA was one act which actually recognized women, but it is being diluted through the maternity benefit is not being given properly. It is being restricted to one child, 2 children. This is not the way. I think it is a right and it has to be given as a right. Child care services, health services, all these have to be provided. Very important, I think, to reduce the drudgery of women's work, both productive work as well as reproductive work. And the Ujjwala is one example, and it is a pity that Ujjwala is also now sliding back rather than actually being strengthened. And finally, I think I have to say that the unequal institutional norms, the patriarchal norms, which Venkat was talking about, is we have to address. We have to address to enable women's voice and leadership in decision making around their lives. We recognize women's informal roles. We overexploit their labor. Women self overexploit their own labor, but we don't give them positions in the public domain. I think that has to change, and I think that is a priority on this Women's Day for the policy. Thank you very much, Govind.
Great, great. Thank you. So thank you, Nitya, Professor Nitya Rao, that you really covered such a vast kind of thing. And I think the most important aspect you covered, that important thing, that without recognition of knowledge, you don't recognize the agency. So all kind of speakers have talked about patriarchy and agency, two words. And I was thinking that in brief, we can discuss about what is patriarchy. Patriarchy is really, in terms of, it started in India, that in terms of as a movement work. But it really began to be, still have to do a lot of research on patriarchy. Although some work has been done on Brahmanical patriarchy, which was referred in the first presentation, that was Venkata very well pointed out. But what is patriarchy? That would be really the male system or the male system's control over personal behavior, attitudes, then resources and decision making. So in brief, this is the kind of patriarchal structures that we are talking about, where some people are considered impure and some people are considered pure. So that's why this whole Brahmanical patriarchy comes. I'm putting in a capsule form, so it is not detailed because of the time. We have limited time. And the second is also in terms of the agency. Agency was referred in all kind of sessions. It was very, very important. And agency is really having unmediated right to control and own resources. That what comes in one. Resources also include knowledge. Freedom from fear of violence within home and outside. And third feature would be ability to think and act to secure strategic interest and, if necessary, to change gender norms. Decision making over their reproductive and productive work, including birthing and nurturing, and having representation and voice in society and influencing policy. Now, what we have been doing is the state is the domesticated agency. That means that women can have these rights, but not touch really the patriarchal structures. That's what you all have been talking about, or we all have been talking about it. But particularly all three presentations pointed out that without kind of, in crude language, say rocking the boat, this has been done. So I think that these are the features that we can discuss. But before I think that I will not take time any in summing up, but let me take some burning questions because of the limited time. Sorry, I'm also very limited time because I have a appointment to take vaccine today and I could not change it. So that was the reason that I am also a bit rushed for such a wonderful presentation and very, very good. So questions, Purnima, can you point out?
So far we don't have any questions on the chat box. People, you can raise your hands if you have any questions.
Before questions, I'll just add up to the last presentation. Yes, we have made a lot of progress, but as far as the policy perspective is concerned, still the patriarchal notions are something which plays a significant role. I'll just try to point out the three important laws. One is the Hindu laws of inheritance, where if a woman is going to die without a will, automatically it goes to the husband's family over there. It doesn't go to the women's parents over there. That is one kind of shows that the women after marriage belongs to the husband's family. And second is the age of consent. There has been a lot of controversy also, because below 18 years we have a law which says it is rape, but child marriages are still not illegal in India. That is, if you're going to marry after 15 till 18, even if you're going to have sex, it's not considered as a rape. That is also shows one kind of thing. And the third one is very prominent one regarding the Goa law. It's in Goa, which has been projected in recent times to be a model for the Uniform Civil Code. That's what I'm a bit worried about that one. It says that very specifically that a right to polygamy. That is, if a woman is not going to bear a child till 25 years, the husband has the right to marry another woman. If the woman is not going to bear a male child till 30 years, the husband can marry another woman. This is still a law in Goa. There are some examples that shows that how the patriarchal notions are still prevalent as far as there are many laws over there. I'm just trying to point out a few of them.
But the important question is that despite this patriarchy, how women are making their way out kind of thing, how they are charting out their path and moving ahead. This is important and this needs to be recognized.
True.
So that would be very, very important. You mentioned, pointed out, Dr. Venkatarayana, about patriarchal structures, how this limits women's agency right from the birth. That was important. That came in the second also. So
I think Professor Nitya Rao wants to say something.
yeah, I will give to all the kind of Professor Nitya Rao and then also Professor Mathili. And probably if you don't have questions, we can sum up on that.
Yeah, thank you, Govind. I was just thinking that, one of the things is that, of course, we can always look, inheritance is a huge problem. But I think that now there is a lot of emphasis also that how do we create an enabling environment for women, even through social protection or the redistribution of resources, because inheritance goes to the heart of lineage and family name and so on, and is quite controversial still. And I think one of the proposals that is being discussed, in fact, in Tamil Nadu, where I am right now with the elections, I think first Kamala Hassan said that if his party will give some money to women as housewives in terms of recognition of their domestic work. And today the DMK party has also announced that they will give 1,000 rupees for housewives. And I think this is a debate which has been a feminist debate since the early 1970s about wages for housework or recognition of housework. And it is not about the amount per se, but I think it is really some recognition that needs to be given. And we cannot value it exactly. We can't say that this is worth 1,000 rupees or 2,000 rupees. But I think the fact that you acknowledge that is an important contribution they are making, that is valued. And there is, of course, the debate that will it help them to bargain or will it stereotype them as housewives? So I think that is an open debate. But I think, maybe it does, the Wages for Housework campaign and so on does believe that this kind of recognition, without getting into the amount and, how do you calculate, how do you impute value, but that it will actually give women some bargaining power in terms of being able to negotiate. Fine, we are doing this. This is also our job and it's recognized. It may be an underpaid job and it gives them some more capacity to actually be empowered, to exercise agency, some encouragement and so on. So I think that, sometimes I feel that we have to make a balance between law as an enabling framework is required for women's rights. But I think the importance of policies and of supportive policies to create an enabling environment cannot be underplayed either. To strengthen women's agency, women are exercising agency. They don't have a choice. They are exercising leadership on the ground. How do we enable it? How do we strengthen it? And I think a public policy has to address some of these structural issues. The fight for legal reform, of course, will remain. It doesn't go away. That will remain. But in the meanwhile, we do need supportive public policy, is what I think. Thank you.
That's very important. Did you hear the important thing about Uttarakhand government passed an ordinance where the wives and the daughters would get the right to land, the half share of the land? That was in February. That is it came in report. I think I need to have the details of this, but I read in the mail and other kind of thing. This would be important change also with regard to land rights. And also as a move forward to 2005 Amendment Act. But I don't want to take the time. I think I can see Professor Vidyut Mohanty who wants to say something. Correct, Vidyut? Please go ahead.
All right. I agree with all of you. Just, I wanted to give a comment briefly that how the COVID has challenged women leadership to be front-line workers. And that is quite visible when we see the migrant women don't want to go back to different places. Instead, they are producing locally suitable vegetables, fruits, and other leafy vegetables which would fulfill their requirements. Perhaps the nutritional level will improve and recognition of their work. In this case, the market will not dominate, but it will be subservient to the needs of the people. Here, the community will decide, and in this case, panchayat leadership will take it. That is one aspect. The other aspect, let us go to Sindhu border. It is the women farmers who are, standing in front of men, and they are telling that until these farm laws are repealed, we are not going to go back. I don't know whether Modi government will oblige or not, but here also the women leadership is very big. There are many such leadership examples. These are two important examples which I thought I should tell.
So this is not a question, this is the supplement, right?
Comment, I said.
Yeah, comment kind
I did say it is a comment.
Yeah, that is very well understood. So I would, I think, request for 2 minutes to each of the panelists. I mean, Professor Mathili first, because she has not yet spoken. Mathili?
Thank you.
Would you like to say something?
Yeah. See, we refer to women who are there in the lower rung of the society, striving hard. Those women get the attention, like maybe the farmers, maybe the Anganwadi workers, or maybe the laborers, etc. And on the other side, we have women who have excelled in the corporate sectors, and as leaders, and have led and made brought high profits for the company, and as well as made become visible. Now, the education is one sector in which women are, which kind of women enter. They are the women who are educated, who have a family background which is, fairly educated. Maybe the parents are also in the formal sectors of employment. When it comes to their leadership in the schools, that is very less talked about. So Kirk, why in one place she asks, while women in development and gender and development speak about these two and draw examples of leadership, where are the teachers in this vid and gad? And that is something that comes to me quite often, because when we are talking about leadership, we assume that the educated, employed women in the public systems like education, or the health, or other social security networks, we really do not look at them. And here is one place where the women's struggles and the voices are unheard, despite working hard and despite leading from the front also. So in India especially, we have not made a dent in the area of leadership of school heads. One of the preliminary, one of those first works I happened to lay work on unconsciously, since I thought that it is an interesting area. But it was found that this was one work which got exclusive attention on women as leaders. Earlier, it used to be like women as a category was considered, women leaders, that is the principals or HMs, were were included, submerged under the category of teachers. There was no distinction between the teachers and the women who led the schools or who are education officers. So one of those critical important areas that we need to take up in our country as a discourse to begin on women leadership is in the area of educational leadership. We do not have. So even in terms of policy, when Govind Kelkar madam was trying to address this question of policy, our recruitment policies are gender neutral. In terms of recruitment policies in most of the states, they are gender neutral. So it comes on seniority basis or it comes through direct recruitment. If there is a merit, yes, you get in. But after having got in through the merit and through the direct recruitment competitions and all, how do these women perform? Where are they? How are they negotiating and navigating with a system which has got its own beliefs and values that are drawn from the larger society, which is mostly patriarchal? So this becomes very important when we are addressing some of the important areas of learning deficit in the country. While the women teachers are seen as very good, very appropriate to teach in the classrooms, why women are not seen as that good and appropriate to lead the schools, to lead the education systems, is something to be tapped. That's the policy intervention that we need to take also.
Thank you so much, Professor Mathili. I need to apologize. I have to now go for vaccine to take, and in 10 minutes I have the appointment, so which will take going to the center where I have the appointment. So Professor Nityanand has very kindly agreed to chair the session. I am sorry that I am missing this very important kind of discussion, but I'll connect with you later. So please excuse me and continue. I hand over the chairpersonship to Professor Nityanand. Professor Nityanand, please.
Thank you, Professor Govind Kelkar, and hope for the best for you for your vaccination.
Thank you.
Hope you don't get any
reaction. I'll let you know. Thank you.
Okay, so continuing with the discussion, if anybody would have some further questions, comments.
Yes, sir. Can I make a small comment over now?
Okay, yes.
Yeah. I agree with Professor Nitya Rao that along with the legal reformation, there has to be a policy support system, no doubt about that one. But also we should make sure that the policy support system is also something which is going to bring about a real development in the lives of women, rather than trying to reinforce the patriarchal nature as far as the jobs is concerned. Like as we see in many of the self-development group, how the certain gender-based rules are something again reaffirmed, whatever the kind of a nature of job. To quote also, I'll try to show that only in the MSME sector, only you have around 13.6% of the women entrepreneurs over there. So that is also quite shocking. We need to increase the policy intervention, should be more inclusive in trying to expand the scope as far as the women is concerned. Even in the corporate leadership, with Professor Maithili was talking about, we have around only 11% of them as far as the leadership position is concerned. That is also something which needs to be. So the policy reforms, policy support system also has to be oriented in such a manner that slowly we have to shed the patriarchal notions and value system associated with that one. So along with that, the legal reforms are going to bring about a lot of transformation, help women to really exhibit more of the leadership skills is concerned. That's my point. Thank you, sir.
Okay.
If I may just, Professor
Any
Nityanand,
other
I think,
participants would like to have any comments?
yeah, I'll just make a concluding comment. Mainly, I don't have anything much to add. I just wanted to thank you and thank CSD for the opportunity for having this discussion today on International Women's Day. I think in India, we have seen a lot of progress, a lot of legal progress as well, especially in the 2000s, in the decade of the 2000s. There was a lot of legislation on violence. I think the Justice Verma Commission. And I think what we need to be really careful, and we need to, International Women's Day is about mobilization, about organization, about celebration. And my request to everybody is that we have to again get together to actually fight and struggle against the setbacks or the move backwards that we are seeing over the last couple of years, whether it is in terms of honor killings, whether it is in terms of violence, whether it is in terms of withdrawal of support to women, also to poor men. I would include in this that it is not only women, but when we are moving towards gender equality is what we want. We want equal opportunities in all ways. And I think that some of the pushback that is coming in India against women's rights, I think this is something we need to be really vigilant about, so that, I know that there are many more battles to be won. And I think the women's movement for the last 50 years has been fighting, has been building bridges, has been building networks with other movements. And I think even small victories. I started my career in SEWA, which is Self-Employed Women's Association. It is a trade union of women workers. And one of our mottos was that we should celebrate even small victories, because it is so difficult for women to get equality or victories. We have come a long way since then, but this time, I think, is really, people pointed out, Vidyut ji pointed out to the farmers on the Singur border. The Supreme Court judgment, or the Supreme Court said that women farmers can go home, they're not farmers. I think these kind of statements is where we have to be very vigilant and very careful in order to immediately be aware of what is going on and to fight against it. I think we have to know how to choose our battles. And for me, the first battles are really that to hold on to the gains we have already made and then push forward. So with this, I would like to close and wish you all a very happy International Women's Day in solidarity.
Okay, thank you. I guess we do not have any further comments and questions. I hope you all agree that we had a very interesting discussion. We started with, how patriarchy works in our society, in our family, and how that kind of acts as constraint for women coming out, participating in workforce, and eventually taking up the leadership role. We also have seen, discussed that there have been situations where women are coming out in large numbers in a particular fields where women are a large number, but when it comes to leadership role, they are not chosen over men. Suddenly, men are considered to be the, more appropriate for leading even the spheres where women are in large numbers. Now, this is also linked to what was coming from patriarchy, and not just patriarchy, but in a society where equality of opportunity is by and large absent. It's not just about women, but if you think about other marginalized section of population, be it Dalits, be it tribals, you will see a similar thing happening. They might come up to certain level, but then beyond that becomes difficult. But we have also discussed, women taking up leadership role in rural economy, in food security, and how they are providing leadership in a very difficult situation. So the crux, I think, is that the major challenge is that equality of opportunity, which has also been highlighted by the speaker, that whether it's women, whether it's Dalit, whether it's minorities, whether it's tribals, and people coming from poor background in general, who are not empowered to be, from their birth, always find it difficult to go up, so because our society is very feudal also. Now, unless we get into that, unless we ensure equality of opportunity, unless we give equal education in terms of quality also to all it's difficult to get out of all those things. So challenge is very huge. We have seen some progress, but of course that is not good enough. And hopefully, we all would be with our fight. We all would be able to bring a better situation in coming days. I would now request Purnima to formally give vote of thanks to our honorable speakers and other participants. Purnima, please.
Thank you, sir. Yeah, thank you, everyone. Thank you very much, everyone. On behalf of CSD, I extend my deep sense of gratitude to Professor Nityananda for his welcome note and for setting the tone for the discussion, and also for being kind to conclude the session as well. And I'm extremely thankful to Professor Govind Khelkar for agreeing to chair the session and for the wonderful job done. And my special thanks are due to the three speakers like Professor Nitya Rao, Dr. Maithili, and Dr. Venkat for their perspectives, the examples given on successful women leaders in food security, and for raising our concerns on critical issues that has to be addressed. And I also express my gratitude to my good colleagues at CST and the fellow participants of this event. Thanking you all. Yeah.
Thank you, Purnima, for giving the opportunity. Thank you, CSD, for giving the opportunity. Ma'am, Nitya ma'am, got to see you on the panel, and I thank you so much. It was a wonderful listening to you, and as well as Venkat Narayan. Good to get in touch.
Thank you everyone. Thank you CSD, and thank you Director Purnima, everyone, and the speakers Maithili ma'am and Nitya ma'am, everyone. It's really very good initiative, and hope we continue this dialogue for a long period.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Purnima, for organizing and getting in touch.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.